I've always believed libraries had a kind of magic to them. Not the obvious kind, no glowing portals or enchanted books, but a quieter magic. The kind that lives in the dust floating through slanted light, in the hushed voices that never dare to rise above a whisper, and in the way time itself seems to slow down between the shelves. That's probably why I spent so many evenings there. My friends would tease me, say I was too serious, too caught up in reading when I should have been out living. But I always felt that in this place, surrounded by books older than me, I was closer to finding answers. Or maybe I just liked the silence. And then there was her. The librarian. She was unlike anyone I'd ever met. Mid-40s, graceful without trying, and carrying herself with the kind of calm confidence that made the whole room seem steadier when she walked in. Her dark hair fell neatly just below her shoulders, a streak or two of silver catching the light whenever she bent to shelve a book. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it wasn't the kind that faded quickly, it lingered, soft and warm, like it had been waiting for the right moment. Over the months, she had guided me gently, suggesting novels I never would have picked up on my own, pointing me toward authors whose words seemed to reach into the places I hadn't known how to put into sentences. She never asked much in return, just listened. Observed. A kind of attention that felt rare. That night, the library was unusually quiet. Just the faint tapping of rain against the tall windows, the distant hum of the heating system, and the occasional creak of the wooden floor when she moved. I remember sitting at my usual table, a stack of books spread out, when her footsteps drew closer. The sound of her heels, measured, unhurried, echoed softly between the shelves until she appeared beside me. "You always choose the heaviest volumes," she said, her voice low, carrying that slight edge of amusement she sometimes allowed herself. She placed a book down in front of me, her fingertips brushing the cover almost tenderly. "Try this one. It's lighter on the hands, but heavier on the heart." I looked at the title, but I'll admit I barely read it. My attention was on her. The way the lamplight caught in her eyes. The subtle trace of vanilla and something floral that seemed to follow her, faint but impossible not to notice. And then, as if the moment required no build-up, she leaned just a little closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. "Come after hours," she said quietly, like a secret meant only for me. "I'll teach you more than books can." For a second, I wasn't sure I had heard her right. My heart stuttered against my ribs, and every thought scattered except one: she wanted me to stay. The rain kept falling, the library stayed silent, and all I could do was nod, caught between disbelief and a pull I couldn't quite explain. The library after closing felt like another world entirely. By day, it was a place of quiet bustle, pages turning, footsteps echoing between shelves, students whispering over their notes. But once the doors shut and the last visitor left, the silence thickened, like velvet draped across every corner. Even the air seemed to change, cooler, carrying the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. That night, I stayed behind. My pulse quickened when I heard the metallic click of the front door lock. It was a small sound, yet it sealed me into this hidden world with her, a world that suddenly belonged to only the two of us. She moved through the dim aisles with a kind of ease, as though the rows of books were her confidants. The soft rhythm of her heels tapped against the wooden floor, echoing faintly. She didn't rush, there was never any rush in her movements, but there was purpose. I followed, feeling like I was trespassing into some secret I wasn't meant to know. We entered her office, tucked into the back corner of the library. I'd seen the doorway before, always closed, always slightly mysterious. Inside, the room glowed under the warm light of a desk lamp. Stacks of books lined the walls, but unlike the library outside, these shelves were lived in. A cardigan hung neatly over the back of her chair, a porcelain teacup rested on a coaster, and there was a faint trace of her perfume woven into the air, mingled with the earthy smell of chamomile tea. "Sit," she said softly, gesturing toward the chair opposite her desk. Her voice wasn't commanding, but it carried a weight that made me obey without thought. She busied herself for a moment, filling a small kettle and setting it on a warmer. The faint bubbling of heating water soon filled the quiet. My eyes lingered on the small gestures she made, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her fingers tapped absently against the edge of the desk while she waited. When the kettle hissed, she poured the water over a small pouch of tea leaves. Steam curled upward, carrying the soothing scent of chamomile. She set the cup in front of me, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest second as she slid it across the desk. That single touch, as soft as it was, sent a spark through me that no book had ever managed. "Drink," she murmured. "It'll help you slow down." I lifted the cup, the porcelain warm in my hands, the rising steam fogging my vision for a moment. She sat opposite me now, her own cup in hand, her gaze steady but unreadable. The world outside, the rain, the cars, the rest of life seemed impossibly far away. All that remained was the golden glow of the lamp, the faint clink of porcelain, and the presence of a woman who carried more secrets in her silence than any book I had ever read. And I realized then, this was not about books anymore. Not really. She led me back out from her office, not to the main floor of the library, but into a smaller side room I had never noticed before. The door opened with a faint creak, revealing shelves lined not with common novels, but with volumes that looked older, more fragile, some leather-bound, some with spines cracked by decades of turning. The air here was heavier, carrying the dry sweetness of parchment and dust, like stepping into the past. "These," she said, her voice lowering as though the books themselves deserved reverence, "are the ones we don't usually lend. They're companions more than objects. They've survived because someone cared enough to protect them." Her fingertips trailed along the edge of a shelf as she spoke. I watched the way her hand lingered on the spines, pausing with a kind of tenderness I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the words she respected, it was the lives inside them. She selected one volume, its cover worn smooth, and placed it carefully on the wooden table between us. When she leaned forward to open it, I noticed the faint brush of her shoulder against mine. It wasn't intentional, at least, I told myself it wasn't, but the contact sent a quiet tremor through me. "Books are never just about the text," she continued. "They're about conversations, between the writer, the reader, and sometimes, the silence in between." I nodded, though my mind was divided. Half of me was drawn into the richness of her explanation, the other half was entirely consumed by her presence so close to mine. I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her arm where it brushed against me. I caught the delicate scent of her hair, something floral, faint but steady. For a moment, we both leaned in closer, our heads nearly touching as we bent over the same page. The quiet stretched, thick with something unnamed. Her breath stirred lightly against my cheek, and when I finally looked up, her eyes were already on me. There was no laughter, no attempt to soften the moment. Just silence, her gaze holding mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Then, just as quickly, she looked back to the page, her hand sliding across the parchment as though nothing had happened. But it had. Because now, every word she spoke, every gesture she made, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I wasn't learning about books anymore. I was learning about her, between the lines, in the spaces no one else would notice. And suddenly, that felt like the most dangerous lesson of all. The hours slipped by more quickly than I realized. The rain outside had softened to a steady patter, and the library had taken on that deep, midnight stillness where every sound feels amplified, the creak of a chair, the turning of a page, even the rhythm of breathing. She sat across from me at the table, her posture relaxed now, one hand cupping her cheek as she studied me. Not the book in front of us, me. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. I gave a small shrug, though inside my chest a storm was gathering. "I guess I just don't always know what to say." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment but in curiosity. "You come here almost every evening. Always reading, always searching. What is it you're really looking for?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I stared down at the book, words blurring on the page. Finally, I exhaled and let the truth slip out, my voice lower than usual. Direction. Maybe, belonging. Sometimes I feel like everyone around me has their life mapped out, and I'm just wandering. Reading helps, but it also reminds me of how much I don't know. How far I still have to go. There was a silence after that. Not awkward, not heavy, just quiet. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk, and I noticed the faintest tremor in her breath before she spoke. You think you're alone in that? She gave a soft, almost humorless laugh. I spend my nights in this building surrounded by thousands of voices, and yet most of the time, I feel like I don't exist outside of these walls. People come, they borrow, they leave. No one stays. Her words lingered in the dim air, carrying a vulnerability I hadn't expected from her. She always seemed so composed, so self-assured. But in that moment, I saw something different, loneliness tucked beneath her elegance. I didn't know what to say. So I did the only thing that felt right. Slowly, carefully, I reached across the table and let my hand rest near hers. Not touching yet, but close enough for the invitation to be felt. Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, hesitating. And then, almost unconsciously, she let her hand shift, just enough for her fingertips to graze the back of mine. The contact was brief, delicate, but it carried more weight than words ever could. My heart thudded in my chest, and for a moment, the library seemed to hold its breath with us. She pulled back first, but not completely. Her hand remained on the desk, open, lingering. It's strange, she murmured, her gaze dropping to the page between us. Sometimes the people we least expect become the ones who make us feel seen. Her voice trembled slightly, and in that trembling, I heard the truth neither of us was ready to speak aloud. We were no longer just a librarian and a student. Something had shifted, quiet but irreversible. We left the smaller reading room and returned to the main hall of the library. The lamps had dimmed to their night setting, casting long shadows across the shelves. It felt different now, less like a public space, more like a sanctuary carved out for just the two of us. She carried a stack of books against her chest, moving with the ease of someone who knew every step of the floorboards, every uneven patch of wood. I followed, my own arms full, though my mind was somewhere far from organization or cataloging. We stopped in one of the taller aisles, the shelves stretching up toward the ceiling. She set down her stack and began sliding books into place with practiced precision. I mirrored her, though clumsily, my eyes too often drifting toward her profile, the curve of her cheek, the calm concentration in her gaze. At one point, we both reached for the same book. A heavy leather-bound volume, its spine cracked but still elegant. My hand landed first on the spine, hers covering mine a second later. The world seemed to pause. Her skin was warm against mine, her fingers slender and steady. The contact was innocent, two people reaching for the same thing, but the silence that followed carried a weight neither of us could deny. I didn't move. Neither did she. Her thumb shifted slightly, brushing across the ridge of my knuckle. Not on purpose, perhaps, but it was enough to send a shiver crawling up my arm and into my chest. My breath caught, and I dared to glance at her face. She was already looking at me. For a moment, her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, a small laugh slipped out, a soft, almost nervous sound, so different from the poised woman I thought I knew. It wasn't dismissive, it was more like she had startled herself, caught in something she hadn't planned for. She withdrew her hand gently, the warmth leaving with it. "You're quicker than I expected," she said, her tone light, though her voice carried that same subtle tremor I had heard before. I slid the book onto the shelf, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Maybe I just got lucky. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged. Every movement, her hand brushing her hair back, the way I shifted the stack of books in my arms, felt too loud, too meaningful. We continued shelving, but the rhythm was broken. I was acutely aware of every step she took near me, every time her sleeve brushed my arm as we passed in the narrow aisle. It was as if the simple act of touching her hand had unlocked something, and now the air itself felt heavier, humming with unspoken possibility. When the last book was finally placed, she exhaled softly, almost like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Her eyes met mine again, and for a second, the silence stretched so thin it felt like it might break. But she only smiled faintly, steadying herself. "Books can be dangerous, you know," she murmured. "Sometimes they teach us things we weren't ready to learn." I wasn't sure if she was talking about the story in her hands, or the one unfolding quietly between us. By the time we finished shelving the last book, the library was completely still. Even the rain outside had stopped, leaving behind a silence so deep I could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the circulation desk. She carried a volume across the aisle, lifting her chin to scan the higher shelves. I noticed the way her brows furrowed slightly as she stretched upward, her fingertips just brushing the spine she wanted but not quite reaching it. Before I could think better of it, I stepped forward. "Here," I murmured, my voice softer than I intended. I reached above her, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body just inches away. My arm brushed lightly against her shoulder as I slid the book free. The closeness was dizzying, her perfume, delicate and warm, rising in the air between us, the faint rustle of her blouse as she shifted, the rhythm of her breathing, quicker now, matching my own. When I handed her the book, she didn't take it immediately. Instead, she turned slightly, and suddenly we were face to face, far closer than we'd ever been before. Her eyes held mine, steady, searching, and for a suspended moment, neither of us moved. The world had narrowed to this small space, her gaze, her breath brushing faintly against my cheek, the tremor that tightened in my chest. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in my throat. It was she who moved first. Not away, but closer. Her hand rose, slow and uncertain, and came to rest lightly against my chest. The warmth of her palm pressed through the thin fabric of my shirt, a touch so delicate it almost felt imagined. "You make me forget myself," she whispered. The words landed with a weight I wasn't ready for, pulling me deeper into the current I'd been trying to resist. My heart pounded beneath her hand, loud enough that I wondered if she could feel it. I swallowed hard, searching her face. She looked different now, not the composed, untouchable woman I had known behind the desk, but vulnerable, conflicted. Like she was standing on the same edge as I was, unsure if she should step forward or retreat. Her hand lingered, fingers spreading slightly against my chest, before she drew in a sharp breath and let it fall back to her side. The space between us remained charged, alive with everything unsaid. "I shouldn't," she began, her voice barely audible. Then she stopped, shaking her head faintly as if to silence herself. I wanted to ask what she meant, to close the distance, to tell her I didn't want her to stop. But something in her expression, a mix of strength and fragility, held me still. Instead, I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. Respecting the boundary even as my entire being ached to cross it. We stood there, the quiet pressing in, our breaths mingling in the space between us. Neither of us moved, yet everything had already changed. And in that moment, I knew whatever came next would never let us return to what we were before. The clock above the circulation desk chimed softly, breaking the silence that had wrapped around us like a spell. The sound was faint, almost reluctant, as if even time itself didn't want to intrude. She stepped back slightly, putting just enough distance between us for the air to return. I felt the loss immediately, the absence of her hand on my chest still burning like an imprint. Without a word, she gestured for me to follow. We drifted back toward her office, the glow of the desk lamp spilling into the hallway like a beacon. Inside, the room felt warmer than before, as if it had absorbed the weight of everything that had just happened. She sank into her chair with a quiet sigh, not of exhaustion but of surrender. I sat opposite, the steam rising from our forgotten cups of tea curling faintly between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the lamp and the faint patter of water dripping outside. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was steady, though gentler than before. You shouldn't mistake me for someone who has answers. I don't. All I can offer are stories. And perhaps a little company. Her eyes lifted to mine, and in them I saw the vulnerability she so carefully hid from the rest of the world. Not weakness, never weakness, but a quiet truth. She was just as human, just as uncertain, as I was. I don't need answers, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Sometimes it's enough just to not feel alone. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't playful or guarded, it was warm, real. She stood then, circling the desk slowly, her steps unhurried. When she reached me, she rested one hand gently on my shoulder before leaning down, her cheek brushing lightly against my temple. The embrace was soft, delicate, yet it carried more weight than anything that had come before. Her arms slipped loosely around me, not holding me captive but steadying me, grounding me. I could feel the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat against my cheek, calm, steady, as though it had waited years for someone to notice it. I closed my eyes, breathing in the faint scent of chamomile and paper that clung to her. In that closeness, all the uncertainty and hesitation melted into something simple, two people, finding solace in each other's presence. After a long moment, she drew back, her hands resting lightly on my arms before she let go. Come back tomorrow, she said softly. There's always more to learn. The words carried no promises, no dramatic declarations. And yet, they were enough. Enough to tell me this wasn't the end. Enough to leave me walking out of the library with a warmth in my chest that no book had ever given me. As I stepped into the cool night air, I looked back once. Through the tall windows, I could still see her silhouette framed by the lamplight, poised yet softened, watching. The library no longer felt like just a place of books. It had become a place of secrets, of connection, a place where one invitation had quietly changed everything. And tomorrow, I would return.